Good afternoon and welcome back to the Public Service Commission. We are continuing with the hearing in docket number 2022-188-EC. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. With us virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin, and appearing in the hearing room, we have Commissioner J. Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner C. Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. I see Mr. Ellaby standing.
I am, Madam Chair. I'm requesting to change the order of our two witnesses so that we would call Greg Booth to the witness stand first, Paul Bashas second. The reason for that is that Mr. Booth has primary care of his wife, who is recovering from surgery to repair a bad break, maybe even worse than yours, Commissioner, break of her arm. And he needs to get, if possible, we would like to call him as our first witness and try to get him finished today so that he can be excused and he won't have to come back tomorrow.
Are you asking to take him out of order?
I'm asking to take him.
No, I mean out of order with Mr. Or is Mr. Willoughby's going to finish with his two witnesses and then?
Well, Mr. Willoughby's, their second witness, Mr. Lupino, had no direct testimony. His
Okay.
testimony is
Right.
rebuttal only.
Right.
So my understanding is he comes after our witnesses.
Okay.
So
Correct.
what I'm trying to do is put up Mr. Booth as the next witness so that he can get out of here today.
All right, sir.
And Madam Chair, members of the commission, you know, we obviously feel the compassion for Mr. Booth. If you will recall, though, Mr. Booth was a person, when we were looking for dates to schedule this, his schedule was used as a means of suggesting that this week was not the proper week. And then that objection, and it was for medical reasons, I don't know what those medical reasons were, but then that objection was withdrawn. And we all come here today understanding that we'll do what we need to do to complete the hearing. What we understood whenever the commission staff asked us, do we have any objections to presenting direct and rebuttal at the same time? And we said we do not. We listed our witnesses. It was our intent today to present Mr. Bingle and finish with Mr. Bingle, and then present Mr. Lupino, who has a rebuttal testimony, have those two witnesses completed. And I agreed with Mr. Ellerby that I thought the hearing was, you know, basically a day and a half sort of hearing. And I was thinking that our case would be completed today, and then we would complete their case tomorrow. Tomorrow morning might have been a 10 to 1. It could go into the afternoon. That's all possible depending upon answers and the like. But that's what we would like to stay with. That's what we've planned on. And I don't think it's unreasonable to ask Mr. Booth to stay over. In fact, what we were going to ask when we came back today is that we complete our witnesses, assuming they get completed today, and then we break for the evening. It could be at 4 o'clock.
And when were you going to bring that up?
Say again?
When were you going to bring that up?
Well, I was going to bring it up when we got back here this afternoon. We didn't know how things were going to go this morning. We assumed, and we don't know how much longer Mr. Bingle is going to be on the stand. But that doesn't seem to be an unfair request to make, to break at that point at the conclusion of our testimony today, and then transition into Mr. Ellerby's clients. He's got two witnesses. We had two witnesses, and then complete those tomorrow. The commission does have the entire week scheduled. We do not believe, obviously, that we don't think that's going to be needed. We think the hearing will be completed tomorrow, but that would be our request.
Madam Chair, if I could,
Mr. Elby?
um,
I did ask at the beginning of the hearing, are there any preliminary matters? Did I not?
you did.
Okay.
We gave Ms. Moser an estimate of a day to a day and a half for this hearing, Friday morning. And Mr. Willoughby agreed with that estimate, which would mean, of course, reaching all of the witnesses today. So that's what my understanding of where we were headed. And I did not realize that Mr. Booth's wife's accident that broke her arm and led to the surgery and has led to a very difficult recovery is something that's happened recently, and he needs to get back and take care of her. So that's the reason for our request, and that wasn't something that we realized until this morning.
And y'all aren't willing to accommodate?
Well, we didn't know about it until just now.
Okay. Let's finish with Mr. Bingle. We'll take a quick break and see what we can get accommodated, if y'all don't mind. You know, we never know when we're going to have to make a request for an accommodation.
Well, all true, and, you know, it wouldn't hurt to accommodate our request either. So that's all.
Is there an emergency, or is there?
We have no emergency. Nobody has broken an arm. Nobody is in the hospital, of which I'm aware. But, you know, well, in any event, we will obviously.
I think this is something that needs to get worked out.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Bingle, you're still under oath, sir, and I think we're at the point of commissioner questions. So.
Yes, indeed. Thanks.
Commissioners, questions for the witness. Commissioner Williams.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon.
So I appreciate your testimony and your experience. I'm going to need your help unpacking what we have before us here. I understand what Mr. Wright said earlier this morning. That was simple and easy to follow. But the issues with the poles and the placement of the lines is just a little bit more complicated. So at the appropriate time, the time you deem appropriate, I'm going to ask you to either use that whiteboard to draw us a diagram of what the situation is regarding the poles and the lines, or use the Elmo to do the same. Okay?
Is it? There were 3 figures in my direct.
I saw the pictures.
Okay. Would it help if we talked through those?
Well, I would prefer for you to draw them, but if we can get the pictures up on the.
Well, tell me. I'm not quite clear what you're looking for in the drawings.
I'm trying just a diagram of the lines and where the fiber is now, and where Spectrum wants it to be, and where York wants it to be, and the difference, the practical difference between those 2 locations in terms of safety. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes.
Would you prefer to use your exhibits
Well,
to try to point?
Perhaps both, I guess, is what I'm thinking. We could go through those quickly, and then if you need more detail.
Okay. Madam Chair, we may need to break to pull those exhibits so we can place those on the Elmo, unless council has them readily available.
I think we can put them on the Elmo, Your Honor. This is your breath testimony.
Yes.
Mr. Willoughby, are you able to work the Elmo, or do we need to find somebody that, I know I can't, but
Might need your technology team here. If you would direct me to the page in your testimony that you want me to display,
23.
and this is your direct testimony, page 23.
Let me check. Yes.
Okay.
23, 24, and 25.
Okay, let's see, I'll do them one at a time. Let's see how good I am.
Williams, I think this would be a good starter.
Okay, sounds good. I'm trusting your
We're-
judgment. Yes, sir.
we either need to get a wireless mic, or we're gonna need you at the podium.
Okay. So there, look on the, she's gonna put it on the screen. There you go. Would that pointer be of help that you can point on the screen?
No, it's more, if you could switch the pages for me, better for me to talk from here.
Okay, you talk from there. You've got the pointer, and it's on the screen. And you just tell me when you want me to turn the page, and I'll try to be a decent aid.
So this was a poll. I do a lot of cases for the Federated Insurance that insures most of the cooperatives, and when an incident occurs, like this, in this case, it was a car impacting the pole, I'm called out to evaluate the scene and see if there was decay in the pole and see if it was loaded properly, just to see, and it's proactive. There are not even any suits yet at that point, but that's what I do to let them know that, no, your design was good and pole was not decayed, nothing looks liable on your part. So this was a 35-foot class 5. I believe it was Santee Electric, not too far from here. And what I wanted to show you is here's a typical single-phase pole. Primary on the top and then a neutral. And these are a lot of the poles that travel, there might be 50 of them to travel to a home to deliver power. And 50 of them are fine just like this. But when, next page then. Who's that guy?
Number 5, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So first of all, if 18 feet is the normal bottom attachment height on a pole, and that leaves 2.5 feet for the cable to sag to maintain the 15.5 in the middle. When we put it at 18, we've got 91 inches here, because that's a pretty bare pole. Still meets the 84 from the neutral. But then to meet the 18 midspan, we've got to raise that attachment height to the next picture. We'd have to go to 20.5 in order to maintain 18 feet at the midspan, and now we don't meet the 74. So it's, yeah, and this was a real pole I had dealt with, and I just thought, this is a great example that you got a very simple pole, 2 wires, and yet those new clearances would require a taller pole just in order to attach communication. Now, beyond that, the issue, I'll come over here.
Well, let's just stay here for a minute.
Okay.
Let's stay here for a minute. Let's slow down here.
Oh, okay, sure.
So, which picture represents the clearance that you think, in your opinion, is appropriate? Which one of these pictures? We're looking at 6 now. Is it 5?
None of them do.
None of them.
Well, I take that back. Yes, the 18-foot attachment on image 5.
On page 5.
That's typically where the lowest telecom attachment is attached to the pole.
Okay. Now, from your understanding of York's argument, is this requirement from their perspective, not what you think, but from what you understand from their argument, is this the safety issue? This height From their argument, not from yours. I know what you're.
No, it's not at the pole they're concerned about. They're concerned about the midspan.
Okay, but at this height though.
Well, at this height, the midspan would be 15 and a half.
And is that their concern?
Yes.
Now, if you can, I just want to understand your understanding of their argument.
Sure.
If that may sound strange, but what is it about that midspan that concerns them?
They've talked about it. It'd be nice to have extra clearance on a roadway in order for equipment to travel. And that's, as I say, that's one of the reasons. I read through the NESC handbook, and before the NESC had those uniform heights, people would be used to living in a community with a certain roadway clearance, and then head into another community which had a different one, lower, and boom, accidents. I mean, that was the main driver for the NESC to establish consistent clearance over the roadway, so everybody knows they're the same.
Right. Okay. And so your position is that the NESC standard here on page 5, even with the sagging and the midline at the midline or the midpoint, is sufficient to, I guess,
Meet the 15.5.
Meet the 15.5, but also to be safe.
Yes.
Okay. So, are you familiar with a benefit cost analysis?
Yes.
That concept.
Sure.
Okay. And so, tell me what your understanding of that concept is, or that tool.
How much does something cost, and what's the benefit? Is the benefit more than the cost? Or
Okay.
Not?
So, obviously, this decision was made back in 2004, I believe, to increase the height for the midpoint or the midline, right?
Yes.
Okay. In your experience, for a decision like that, would a benefit cost analysis be a good idea to determine how much this will cost compared to how much benefit will be received from said action?
It would be difficult because how many poles are going to have to be changed out because of that requirement? And then besides changing them out, you got a longer pole, you got a higher cost, and it takes more time to build out. So it'd be hard to put hard numbers to it, but it would be significant.
Okay. What information would be needed to make such an analysis? Would you, and I'm just thinking out loud here, wouldn't you need to know how many accidents have occurred because of the current height?
Oh, okay. That's the other aspect. I was thinking of the construction side of it.
Mm-hmm. I'm right now dealing with the decision whether to or not to pursue this course of action.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes. How many serious incidents happen because the clearance is less than 15 and a half on the roads? I don't think it's a huge number. Otherwise, that would have been looked at sooner.
Okay. And just based on your experience, and we'll get to your witnesses at the appropriate time, but based on your experience, what could that sagging midline, what type of accident could that cause?
It's generally not going to be a vehicle, automobile. It's going to be a truck of some height. The height of a truck is assumed to be 14 feet. So it's got an extra foot and a half in that 15 and a half. So it would be delivery truck, something that, because it generally, I don't think, they're not much lower than 15 and a half when it occurs.
Okay. And in your experience investigating or any other experience, what type of injury would result from, I guess, a truck snagging a line like that?
It can really vary. Sometimes the wire stays intact long enough to pull a pole over, and then you've got electricity on the ground. Otherwise, sometimes the cable will just break. Sometimes he'll start to slow down first, and when he hits it, he stops fairly quickly. So there are a variety of outcomes in those scenarios.
Okay. Would you be able to determine whether or not the accident was caused by the sagging line, sagging at that, I think that 15-foot, what's the
15 and a half.
that 15 and a half foot mark, or could it be that it was sagging lower than that, and that is what actually caused the accident?
Well, that would be, we could determine that by the height of the truck.
Okay. Okay, but that is something that could be determined.
Right.
Okay.
I'm not sure it's on many records of past incidents.
Okay. But wouldn't you need to know that type of information if you're going to make a decision to deviate from a national standard? In your opinion,
Yes.
obviously
Yes.
you're
Is it
speaking for
really a
yourself.
problem, is the question.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Give me 1 second,
Sure,
please.
sure.
Okay. Speaking of sagging, because we talked about that, I've heard that a couple of times. If a line is sagging below that 15 and a half foot point, what is in your opinion, what is the appropriate course of action to correct that that sag?
It's not difficult to just unattach it at the pole and tighten it up.
Okay. Well, what if I was a pole owner? Wouldn't it be easier for me just to increase the standard and not have to worry about attempting to enforce maintenance issues across my footprint?
Well, several times we've heard mention the fact that you need to do a sag and tension analysis of that lowest cable to figure out. And when you do that, you apply the worst weather conditions, and it's going to tell you from wherever you set that. It might be a warm, sunny day. Maybe it's a winter day. It's going to come down to this height. Also, over time, there's going to be some creep, so the cable itself gets just tiny little bits longer. So all of that should be accounted for in the make ready, which is going to tell the guy, okay, then if it has to be this at the midspan, and we know how much sag we have, it's got to be attached this high on the pole. I mean, normally that should be accounted for in the design.
Okay. And I'm sure all that information was considered when the NESC came up with its standard.
Yes, it's those temperatures and everything are in there.
Okay. I want to just take that safety argument a bit further. Other than a truck snagging the line, are there any other safety concerns at the NESC standard?
Do you mean the lowest?
Yes,
over,
sir.
Over a roadway?
Any safety concerns with that NESC standard? I know we talked about the roadway. Are there any others that we have not discussed or mentioned?
No, the rest are non-vehicle typically areas, just pedestrians.
Okay.
So,
could you go through those?
no, the same requirement, 15 and a half feet.
Right. But potentially, I'm trying to look over the horizon. What, at that 15 and a half feet, what safety issues could I anticipate?
Firstly, very, very little. Secondly, generally the bottom attachment is telecom. It's not high electricity wires. And so electric shock and that kind of things, those kind of things are not an issue either. So the risk where 15 and a half feet where people walk is very low.
Okay. Where are you from, sir?
Originally Buffalo, New York. I live in Atlanta now.
Okay. So are you familiar with the topography of York's service area, service territory?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. So you wouldn't know if there was something in their service territory outside of your expert experience that would require them to or support their exceeding the NESC standard?
Well, when I was dealing with this, I assumed there were some hilly, not even hilly, perhaps low mountains in play there. And lots of states have those, and none of them apply a special clearance because of that.
What about farm equipment?
Farm equipment has its own footnote in the NESC that says, let's see, when designing a line to accommodate oversized vehicles, these clearance values shall be increased by the difference between the known height of the oversized vehicle and 14 feet. 14 comes from the fact that that's what the NESC is based on. They say a truck height's going to be 14, and so the actual clearance is 1.5 feet above that. And how they explain that is going to be you're going to end up 1.5 feet above the new height of that equipment, and that's very commonly done in agricultural applications.
So if I'm understanding that correctly, essentially you would take the tallest known equipment that would travel the road and base the height of the wire off that.
No.
Or subtract 14 feet. Help me out. I'm not an engineer.
Sure, it's fine. I sit in on the meetings when this was being discussed, and the height of the equipment in the farming area is different on each agricultural need and changing over time. And so it's intended to be a specific, hey, I got this new whatever it is, and it's 18 feet high, so I need 19.5 feet of clearance, and so they address them that way. To address that on a national basis for the same height, it just wouldn't be practical. Many times it wouldn't be necessary.
Okay. So your position is that the NESC standard is a safe standard?
Based on the fact that it's called that in the introduction.
Okay, and I'll accept that.
Okay.
And it's safe nationally, in your opinion, right?
Yes.
And it's safe in York's service territory, right?
Yes.
Okay. So does that mean you're not buying what York is selling by way of a safety argument for that deviation from the NESC standard?
What I'm saying is that their effort to apply arc flash clearances in addition to that is not what is intended in the NESC.
Okay, well, and there have been other arguments made about the impact of the decision and so forth and so on. I really don't want to get into the specifics of those with you here unless there's something that you have to say about it. But it seems that that decision was made approximately 20 years ago. So would it not be the case that York would have to have some amazing foresight to know that almost 20 years later we would be here and their decision, as they stated, based on safety, would create this level of litigation?
Firsthand, I do not think so. I think when that was adopted, it had nothing to do with arc flash. I think arc flash has come in later as, here's a way we can justify it. And when I first got the inquiry about applying arc flash, I said, I never heard of that before, but I thought, I need to check this out. So I went to section 41 and reviewed all the rules, and the final analysis was there's a rule quoted by Mr. Booth, and it's Rule 410-3A that says an arc flash assessment is mandated to be applied by the employer to evaluate whether or not there is an arc flash issue. Well, the intent of that is not to do an arc flash analysis on every wood pole that a telecom worker is going to work on at an elevated position. That's not the intent of that rule, firstly. Secondly, Rule 235-5 establishes the 40 inches with no reference to the arc flash chapter, which would be if it should be accounted with that. Then you go to section 41, and there's a table in there, 431-1, and it's for communication workers specifically, and it's a maximum approach distance. And for this voltage, it's 36 inches. And there's another rule, 432 in section 40, that says a telecom worker cannot position himself above the level of the lowest supply cable. So those rules in place, along with the training and the exposure to working, the training about working near energized lines while you're a telecom worker, all of those things are why I don't know of any investor-owned utility in the country that expands the communication worker zone past 40 inches.
I understand all of that, and
Okay.
and I really appreciate you sharing it. There's still an issue we have to deal with, in my opinion, and that is the decision to change or to deviate from the NESC standard happened in 2002, 20 years ago. That's my understanding. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Okay. So York is saying the decision was made based on safety. Is that your understanding? Because that's my understanding.
I'm not sure why they said they did it. I'm just saying I don't think it might be for safety, but I'd be surprised if it was because an arc flash analysis was done.
Understood. I get it. It may not be for the arc flash, but
Okay.
and it may be. I don't know. Yeah, but based on your review of the record and testimony and everything you used to prepare for your testimony, I saw the 2004 agreement was listed as an exhibit, and I believe it was your either your direct or rebuttal. Based on your review of that, is there anything in that agreement or anything that you've seen that, in your expert opinion, would lead you to believe that the decision was made for any reason other than safety?
Well, when you say safety, there could be a lot of things you're trying to be safe about. And
Okay, like what? Let's go down the list.
well, I'm just saying besides arc flash
Okay,
and besides the fact that there's poor workmanship on a pole, perhaps from communication workers.
okay.
I mean, that's not a reason to increase the clearance,
Why not, though?
because you could still have those same inconsistencies of construction. That has to be worked out within the engagement of the contract between the people.
Okay. So what I'm hearing from you, sir, is that, and obviously we're not in York's head. We were not present 20 years ago, but it sounds like what you're saying is that the decision could have been made 20 years ago for safety reasons, but in your opinion, there could have been, or there are other ways to address those concerns instead of deviating from the NESC standard.
Exactly. And because there was never any reference, that was the only reference in the testimony, that because of the poor workmanship, we decided to raise the clearances so that we wouldn't have a problem, and that doesn't solve it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Madam Chair, that's all I have.
Indeed.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Vice Chair Powers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good afternoon, Mr. Bingle.
Good
I just
afternoon.
have a couple of things. And I was listening to both your presentation of your summary of your rebuttal testimony, and having seen in your rebuttal testimony that you allege that York in installing communication fiber in violation of its own vertical and midspan clearance requirements, that it's requiring of charter. That was in your testimony.
Yes.
When you say that, you mean that they're doing something discriminatory, not that there's a safety issue in what they're allowing up there or not?
That's correct.
Okay, so there's not a safety issue, it's just a discriminatory issue.
They have an 84-inch communication zone. and they allow that first fiber to be attached in that zone, which then lowers the communication zone for Charter and everybody else.
Okay, which means once the line starts sagging, you're below the 15?
Well, it's probably not that close to the ground.
Okay. And I just heard you testify about the arc flash. Could you just explain a little bit about exactly what that is?
Sure. It's often related to equipment operating, energized electric equipment energizing. Maybe a breaker closing or opening, and there's a spark there, and there's some hazard typically related to that. The telecom rules keep all the telecom workers away from that. And there was an interpretation which fits this question here. Somebody wrote to the NESC and said, in the NESC, they use the term potential exposure to arc flash. And the question was, does that mean any possible exposure or an exposure with a strong possibility of occurring? And they went through all what they were saying here, but the conclusion kind of fits to our position here. While it is theoretically possible for an arc to occur whenever parts or equipment are energized, the likelihood, in part, is typically dependent upon the work being performed on energized facilities, not on telecom facilities. That's the position of the NESC. That's the purpose of the arc flash for people that are working on that.
Okay, well, I mean, you said that has no basis in this case, any arc flash problems. How would you account for and explain any flash issues that are on any of these poles? What causes that?
I'm sorry, what was the end of that?
What causes the flash issues that as far as the poles? Has nothing to do with the cable. It has to be the actual power part.
Energized equipment, yes.
Okay. And you said this is a red. Are there any instances that would apply to this case we're in right now that you're aware of?
Instance of, I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, you said it was, this issue itself is a red herring. Is there any issue that you could think of as far as a flash or arc flash that applies to this?
Not when the
proceeding?
40-inch safety zone is complied with.
Okay. Thank you, sir. That's all.
Sure.
Commissioner Caston?
Afternoon, Mr. Bingle.
Hello, sir. How are you? I wasn't sure who was speaking here.
I see you're a Boilermaker.
Yes, sir. And we're stinking it up in the football field this year.
Well, for the non-football folks, that's Purdue.
That's right.
Very good school. Matter of fact, about 5 or 6 years ago, my wife and I on a trip to Chicago took my she was 9 or 10-year-old granddaughter at the time.
Uh-huh.
We went to Lafayette, Indiana.
Sir, that's it.
Went to see the stadium just because when I'm in college towns, I like to see it. And they got to meet some of your football players, and she wears Purdue shirts to this day, which pains me. I'm a Clemson man.
Well, they're totally separated. One quick thing, we lived in Buffalo. My youngest son wanted to go to Purdue. I did not want him to go because it's 10 hours away. He's going to meet an Indiana girl. He's going to get married, and he's never going to come home. And my prediction was correct.
And you left New York too, so what does that say?
True.
You have a smart son, I guess, right? Let me ask you, on page 13 of 36 of your rebuttal, and you talk about, from your experience, decades at Osmos Utility Services, contractors are required to adhere not only to the NESC, but also to other applicable safety and engineering requirements and regulations, including OSHA and state and municipal safety standards applicable to the installation, operation, and maintenance of aerial communication facilities.
Yes, sir.
So are you saying that all the communications employees, I guess, that install that apparatus and or their contractors, are they trained or certified or anything like that to do those particular things to make sure that the safety standards, the local standards, you know, whether that's York's or Rock Hill, you know, whatever, they are trained and required to meet those standards?
My impression is, in most cases, they're aligned with OSHA and the NESC as far as those kind of requirements. And every time we revise the NESC every 5 years, we connect with OSHA because all of our minimum approach distances and things that OSHA is involved with, we coordinate. I'm sorry. We collaborate with them to make sure if they're making any changes that we make changes. And so those kinds of requirements in the NESC and in OSHA are the same.
Well, do you know if there are any standards or requirements, let's say, whether it's above ground or below ground, and below ground comes to my mind more, of a burial depth or a horizontal clearance between other utilities? Is there any standard? Or
That's in the NESC, yes.
what's the minimum depth? Do you know?
I honestly, that's the section of the code I looked least at.
Well, I don't have a clue either, but I'm pretty sure it's not 6 inches, right?
I'm not sure.
Okay,
Sorry.
we'll save that. Do you know if Charter owns any poles or towers or infrastructure such as this?
I don't believe they do.
And I think, let me find it. Page 4 of 36 of your rebuttal. Lines 15 through 18 say, you know, where it's in bold, York is imposing its clearance requirements to unfairly shift cost onto Charter. And you state the BAA requires electric cooperatives to allow access to their poles. And then you quote, to the extent not prohibited by the National Electric Safety Code.
Right.
And did you read or are you familiar with South Carolina Code sections that I think Mr. Ellaby referred to? I kind of don't remember now, but I think one was section 58-9-3010, and the other was 58-9-3030. Do you recall reading those? Did you
Those are from
read
the
those?
South
Yes.
Carolina.
Yes, sir.
Yes. I went through that whole thing and I highlighted a whole bunch of stuff, and unfortunately I don't have that with me.
I do.
Okay, perfect.
On 58-9-3010, and I'm no attorney either, and I'm assuming you're a Purdue man, you must be an engineer,
Correct.
because I thought I saw that too. But paragraph 4 talks about the broadband network, and it describes or defines what that is.
Okay.
And I don't know that I need to read this whole thing, but when I read that and I see where semicolons are and how things are distinctly separated, reads to me, when it makes reference to National Electric Safety Code, it reads to me that conduits to the extent not prohibited by the National Electric Safety Code, semicolon, antennas, semicolon, equipment, semicolon, fixtures, and so forth. And there's such as that for that. And Section 58-9-30, which is non-discriminatory access, written contracts, retail broadband service. And that paragraph A probably, well, I don't know how it would be in the statute, but it's maybe the second sentence down there where it says, this will help greatly. Excuse me.
Now you can't see me.
Commissioner Williams here was really helping me out wisely so. Access includes the right to non-discriminatory use of all easements and rights of way and to all poles, comma, ducts, comma, conduits to the extent prohibited by the National Electric Safety Code, comma, not prohibited, excuse me, not prohibited by the National Electric Safety Code, comma, and similar support structures owned or controlled by electric cooperative or, comma, if applicable, comma. So my only point being, I'm kind of confused by that too, because, you know, when I read this, it sounds like you're saying that the BAA requires poles, access to poles to the extent not prohibited by the National Electric Safety Code. But I'm being honest with you, and I'm hoping the folks in here clear it up one way or the other. I've not seen anything beyond this that says that specifically. But it would not be the first time I've been wrong, so I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just asking for clarification.
I took the not prohibited by the NESC to mean things like there has to be 12-inch spacing between multiple telecom attachments. And so if you're trying to squeeze one into 8, that's not allowed. So I was thinking of limitations like that was being referred to.
Well, I was trying to think, and I really was. I've been thinking about this a lot.
Okay.
I was trying to think back on my past, which is getting further and further back there, trying to think of any instance that I can think of relative, not just an electric code, but, you know, any code. Because in my earlier days, used to have to deal a lot with codes, you know, building codes and such.
Yes.
And I could not think of an instance where there was any reference to a code that said this is a maximum unless it related to like a load or a load factor or something such as that. I could not think of that. All that I was familiar with were they were always a minimum standard to be met. You could not go below. So are you aware, or can you just give me any that says it's not just a minimum, it's a maximum. You can't go above 14 feet or, you know, whatever it is.
Two different questions there. Let me go back to, I think I memorized that paragraph in the introduction saying that the NESC is used in whole or in part by statute, regulation, or consent as the standard for safe practices for utilities in the United States, which means that, and that was all about pulling minimum out of there and just saying, if you follow this, then you're safe. You don't need additional spacing to be considered safe.
Okay, but I'm not sure that cleared it up for me, but that might be my fault, not
Well,
yours.
I thought it was two questions. Maybe, isn't there another part of that?
Well, I was thinking about, I remember when the drinking water standard for turbidity used to be 1.0. Used to be 1.0, pretty clear water. And at the time, Lake Kiowee, if it rained 3 weeks and the water wasn't treated, was 0.1. Just right out of the lake. So did that meet the standard? And over the course of time, that 1.0 by the regulatory agencies, has, dropped. It's no longer 1.0. But the point being is that was a minimum. It couldn't. The 1.0 was, okay, you can't go over that. But as far as a minimum, you could go below it. So the standard there was, okay, your minimum could certainly, your maximum couldn't be over it, but you could be underneath it and still be good, which is kind of the converse of what we're talking about here. But outside of those kind of things, I just don't know that I know of any standard or safety standard like that. But there's plenty of time for all these wonderful folks out here to kind of help us out on that.
Well, I can give you one short example is that when it comes, the NESC has 3 different loading districts across the U.S. And obviously there's some variation within those. And I know for a fact that utilities, if they've got some high mountainous areas and heavy snow, they set different design criteria there when they're aware of that, because they don't want those coming down all the time. Loading seems to be one thing. Clearances, I've not come across a situation where a utility has said, hey, we want to improve our safety, so we're going to increase our clearances. That doesn't seem to be the avenue to improve safety.
Something that crossed my mind, let me see. Do you know, and I can't remember who mentioned it, but do you know if the poles in question already have a broadband communication cable on them or does not?
I've seen pictures of that where they're already attached, and because of that, Charter would have to pay for a new pole to make room for their attachment.
If there's an existing
Right.
communications cable on it.
Yes.
So the argument seems to still be that 15.5 feet's good enough at a minimum for a 14-foot vehicle, so they shouldn't change it. But if I understand things, and if I understood the testimony of some other witnesses, this isn't something that just sprung on Charter or any of the other communication companies. It's been that way for nearly 20 years. Is that correct?
In a very small portion of the electric industry across the country. Yes, right around here. It's the first I've heard of it. And I don't know of an investor-owned utility who tries to expand it. That covers a lot of ground.
Well, do you know if any of the communication companies, such as Charter, I guess when York introduced this, and I'll have some questions for them, don't worry about that.
Hey,
Do you know if any of the communication companies challenged it or questioned it in 2000 or 2002, 2004, or whenever?
I don't know that, but based on, as I say, the demand for attachments in that era, it probably wasn't perceived as a big issue.
So until we got broadband money, it wasn't an issue?
Because it wasn't economical for a company to develop the broadband in those rural areas without that assistance. They start in Atlanta and San Francisco and Chicago and move out from there, but the rural areas were still vastly underserved.
Understand. One final question. Does Purdue play Ohio State this year?
You know what? Honestly, I should know, but I don't. We lost. We're 2-4, and we've been playing poorly, so I kind of lost interest.
When, if they do, please beat them.
Okay, I'm with you there. Yes.
Thank you.
Hey, excuse me. Do you know the last time when Purdue beat them at home, like 49-20 or something? Haskins was it?
Yes, I do.
I was at that game, man, with my son, and what a riot that was.
Well, now it's in the record.
Yeah. Oh.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belser. Good afternoon. Good to meet you. And,
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
one of the wonderful things about being on this commission is we approach things from 7 different rationale and elements of background.
That is a good thing. Yes.
So eventually I'm going to ask a kind of embarrassing question, but I'm going to work my way up to it.
It's hard to embarrass me.
No, for me, not you.
Oh.
So I'm looking at the BAA, and Commissioner Caston has already referenced to 2 elements in 3030 as well as in 3010. Where we talk about conduits to the extent not prohibited by the National Electric Safety Code. So that's the phrase that's come up a few times. Here's the embarrassing question. What's a conduit?
No, that's a good question. One of the drawings in this case shows a conduit on it where I tried to be so prepared with all of mine.
Well, I've got your testimony, so.
Well, it wasn't in there. It was this
Oh,
drawing that was created by, and it was part of Mr. Basha's, I believe.
okay.
Where he shows that we've got a single phase wire on
Can
the top.
anyone tell us where it is in Mr. Bosch's?
I think it's an exhibit. Oh, it says page 11 of 11.
Here, I'll use yours. Okay. Okay, I'm with you.
It's EPB 8 is the exhibit.
Perfect. So you've got live wires, a phase wire up at the top, and you've got a neutral. That's your electricity. Then down below is a communication attachment. All of those live wires, if you follow them down, they are going down a conduit. That's often referred to as a riser, so that they're encased inside the pole.
And what are the NESC standards related to conduit?
I think the clearances only come into effect above the top of the conduit.
And are those the clearances that we've been talking about? We've been talking about it from the angle of, I'm just trying to get a little bit more specific.
Yes.
That's,
What we've generally been talking about is the clearance between the neutral and the telecom,
right.
which is 40 inches. And when that gets expanded to 84, it requires a lot of new poles.
And there's conduit that continues up
No.
above. No.
That's the only reason there's conduit on this, because that service is going underground
Okay.
to go to the house.
Okay. Does NESC have a perspective on make-ready policies or on sharing cost?
No.
Okay. And how long do poles last, and are they depreciated?
Great question. We did a study of 700,000 poles in all different 5 decay hazard zones in the U.S. And if we were to plant 1,000 wood poles today, the national average tells you that in 45 years, half of those poles would have lost enough strength to be below code requirements. So average life, without any maintenance at the ground line, is 45. There is a service where utilities hire contractors to go out, they dig around the ground, They look for decay, they remove it, they apply supplemental treatment. And if you do that every 10 years, the average life is 73 years. So it's a big difference as to whether a company is doing a good job of maintaining them or just letting them run to failure, basically.
And I know we have some testimony on the value of a pole, but have you entered that?
Well,
Do you know what the value of a pole is in South Carolina?
Well, yeah, the number given here was 4,000 for a single phase and 6,000. That did not surprise me. You have cities where the change out is $15,000 to $20,000 a pole. It's got to be a really simple, like maybe that one I showed you with 2 wires on it. That might be 2,000, maybe.
And are poles depreciated over time?
Generally, 30 years. Yes. With FERC.
Thank you. No further questions.
Sure thing.
I have a couple. Are we talking about the height from the ground and the between the live line at the top and the neutral and all?
Yes.
Is this every pole along the roadway, or are we just talking about where they cross over the road?
No, it's both ways. It's along the road.
Well,
as
if it's clearance for vehicles, why are we talking about every pole along the side of the road?
That's a great question. And I think it was blamed on poor workmanship. So let's set them higher so there's more room for them to fluctuate over time.
For the SAG?
Yes.
And when we're talking about the SAG, we're talking about between 2 poles and at the midpoint, or the SAG's the greatest, would still have the clearance,
middle,
right?
Middle of the span is the mid-span clearance, yes.
Is it engineering? Is it a possibility for engineering and soundness of a system that if you are at a certain level, the minimum level that we've been talking about here, and then you get to a point where either you need to cross over the road or cross over a road right there on the same line, that you increase the height at that point and not all, is there a problem with kind of going along, oops, I'm at a road, I need to go up higher and back down? Is there an engineering or a service issue or any kind of safety issue with doing something like that rather than having to increase 1,000 poles?
Just the fact that when you change anything out of the national uniform requirements for clearance, and you got a company that comes in here and does some work, a contractor, maybe from North Carolina, may not be aware of that. And, you know, it just raises the point of confusion in a needless way. And secondly, in the scenario you described, just like this pole that we looked at up on the graph, 50 of those poles are leading up to a house. And then that one pole needs to be taller to put the transformer on it and serve that house. And then the next 50 poles are fine until you come to the next residence. So it's not like the wholesale increase of height on these poles is way over expenditure, unnecessary, and should be done as needed.
Well, I'm looking at your exhibit NGB3, and this is table 232-1.
Okay.
And you have some blocks highlighted on page 1, and then the block on page 4 that's like a footnote.
Yes.
And in the first column, it's highlighted insulated communication conductors and cable messengers. And so that's the bottom line that's covered in black sheathing or whatever it is, and that's the insulated part.
Right.
Okay. And then it's got, let me see, where's the footnote? Oh, number 4 below, other areas traversed by vehicles such as cultivated grazing forests, orchard lands, industrial sites, commercial sites, etc. And there's the footnote that goes over onto page 4,
Yes.
and it talks about between the known height of the oversized vehicle and 14 feet.
Right.
Okay. Suppose in York County, and this is going to be in the rural part, they're farmers out there, and they've got combines and tractors and highboys and all kind of stuff. Some of which, when I drove a Honda Accord, I always wanted to see if I could drive under one of those because it sure seemed like my little car would fit up under some of those. But suppose one of those is, I don't know, 20 foot tall.
Right.
All right. Using that footnote 26, what should be the height of
Yes.
of the lowest
I'll give
line?
you an easier way to figure it than the way it's worded here.
Okay.
Add 1.5 feet to the top of the equipment.
So that might require the communication line to be at 21.5 feet. I don't even know if there is a piece of equipment that's 20 foot tall, but
Right.
they sure look big.
That's how it works. And you notice this is for cultivated grazing forest. It's specifically for agricultural applications.
Okay. All right. I appreciate you explaining that.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Williams, I see your light on.
Not this guy again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think a lot of people say that. It's just, build over
No, you did a great job.
course of
already.
career being a prosecutor. I don't want to be prosecutorial, but I'm just trying to get to the bottom of it. So I understand your argument as follows. Even though you understand that York's argument for the deviation from the NESC standard is safety, your opinion of what you've seen is that it was based on poor workmanship, and poor workmanship is not an excuse to deviate from the standard based on safety, in your opinion.
Yes.
Okay. Going further, taking your argument even further, the Broadband Accessibility Act, in order to increase access to broadband, is using the NESC standard because it's the gold standard, it's the safe standard, and that's the standard that should be used considering any other existing standards here in South Carolina.
Yes.
All right. And regardless of whether, I guess the final point, regardless of whatever reason York articulates for deviation from that standard, the Broadband Accessibility Act trumps or supersedes that standard, York
Correct.
standard. All right. Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Commissioners, anything further? Commissioner Caston.
Just one follow-up question,
Sure.
and I was looking for it, and
Found it.
I didn't find it, so,
Oh.
but in the course of this, the process, were you able to read Mr. Bosch's testimony?
I reviewed it. I spent a lot more time on Mr. Booth's.
I understand. And I was looking for it to try to find the right page, and I can't, so I'll leave that up to, I'll look, and then I'll assume they'll find it, but someone will.
Ah.
But relative to, I guess, the focus on the safety, I knew somewhere that I think it talked about clearance requirement change contemplating this matter back in 2000. 84-inch neutral conductor clearance grew out of a need to efficiently manage significant membership growth in the service territory, minimize the upgrade, and make ready work for both the cooperative and its pole attachers, reduce safety hazards. I mean, they did talk about safety hazards. And I think they talked about attachers' persistent contractual compliance issues. So the only reason I asked if you'd read it, because I know if I understood his testimony, it wasn't just specifically a safety issue or a truck crossing the road issue, but it was these kind of things. Does that make more sense? Does that make sense to you at all, or does it still not make sense?
I'm not sure what these more things are again yet.
Well, in Mr. Bosch's testimony, talked about the reason why they went with the 84-inch neutral conductor clearance.
Okay.
And and I'm kind of summarizing, so I don't
That's fine. That's great.
check this. Efficiently manage the significant membership growth. You know, the high growth area is growing more, I assume.
Right.
Minimize the upgrade and make ready work for both the cooperative and its pole attachers.
Right.
Reduce safety hazards for communication workers. And address attachers' persistent contractual compliance issues, which I'll let them get into that. I can only surmise or speculate, and I don't want to do that. But my point being, if I read it right, you know, it wasn't just a safety thing, and the things that I kind of read to you, do those?
Well, when you say increase the safety for communication workers, you know, I would probably disagree with that because it doesn't seem to be an issue right now. And the industry has gone 45 years with the 40 inches and been satisfied. That's not to say accidents don't happen. I mean, it's like automobiles. Automobiles have seat belts, airbags, collapsible front ends now, but people still get injured and killed in car accidents. But the incident of comm workers that are really injured seriously due to the communication workers zone is very, very small.
Well, I guess what I'm asking you then is the 84-inch neutral conductor clearance, does it make any more sense or still no more sense if as he says, he believes did that to also efficiently manage significant membership growth?
I don't see how it helps them when they're using more of that space of the pole to efficiently manage the growth. They've lost another 44 inches in that pole, so they're going to have to change more. I live in a cooperative service area. I've been out a lot. I've traveled through cooperatives. When the population gets greater proximity, they do the same thing Duke does. They put their secondary and their neutral above the transformer instead of abound below the transformer. That last drawing we showed, that's because they're only serving one house at a time. And why run secondary for the next 50 poles if you don't need it until you get there? So to me, that's more efficient use of the poles. But to keep putting a transformer on one pole at a time and trying to help accommodate growth that way, I don't believe is the optimum way to do that. When you're way past rural areas and now you're in a populated area, almost everybody puts everything underneath the transformer.
Well, do you know if the poles we're talking about, are we talking exclusively about more rural poles or more, depending on what kind of growth?
That part I'm not sure of. That's why when they say a high growth area, is this where you've already got 50 houses and you're going to add another 100? Or is this where all of a sudden you're going to create a neighborhood and add 100 houses? I mean, in situations like that, you wouldn't be doing one transformer a pole at a time.
Perhaps a map with population, number of customers, projected growth?
Yes.
That'd be kind of useful, wouldn't it?
Well, I think what would be most useful is looking at all their lines of single phase that are the same as the picture I showed you. One primary, one neutral. Those are the areas where it would be ridiculous to put 50 taller poles in a row, and yet you're only needed one at the new house that gets built next year.
All right. I appreciate it.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you very much.
Glad
No
to
more
talk with
questions.
you.
Madam Chair, I
Chair.
have one more question, or line of questioning.
Sure.
Just, and I'm only asking you this based on your experience and based on what you've been asked and what you reviewed. If you don't know the answer, please don't struggle to try to answer it. Just say you don't know.
Try not to do that. Yes.
Right. Based on Commissioner Caston's line of questioning, and what I understand from his line of questioning is he was trying to set safety on the shelf for a second as a reason to deviate from the NESC standard and maybe look to the potential for substantial increased growth in the area and the other things that he mentioned. I mean, is it possible, based on, again, your experience and what you've read here today, that even 20 years ago, York saw this day coming and wanted to prepare to have someone like a Spectrum pay for the make ready? Is that possible?
That's a
Could
good
that be like a
question. Good
business
question.
decision?
And my experience, because I know they have their own planning groups and there are all the standards and all the engineering and construction, doesn't necessarily go 20 years. And I know that every other cooperative has some high growth areas around the country, maybe not in South Carolina, but they don't invoke higher clearance requirements in their high growth areas. They make that work.
So the answer is no. A high growth area,
Oh,
preparing for a high growth area.
I would say every other cooperative that has high growth areas does not, unless they're in South Carolina, does not try to expand that in order to account for it. And it's true for IOUs as well.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's it. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Enjoyed it.
Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So, what is the neutral? What does that do? And is it dangerous? And just help me understand that.
That's a
please.
great question. It's part of the grounding system. It's not electrified unless two wires cross or something like that. That's when it would be electrified. And the issue about where can you use a 30-inch communication worker zone, it's where the neutral is attached to an effectively grounded, the neutral is attached to an effectively grounded messenger, or the fiber is attached to an effectively grounded fiber. And effectively grounded means they've got a wire going down into the ground at least 4 times a mile. And so unless there's an incident occurring, the neutral is very quiet.
Okay. All right. And so you mentioned too the aspect of growth and when things start to become more dense. And you were talking about running 50 poles and you get to one house, and one transformer, 50 more poles in another house, and then one transformer. But once things become dense, you were talking about a different configuration so that I guess you wouldn't have to use so many transformers. Is that correct? Can you explain to me how that works? What's the difference when you?
I was in Owensboro, Kentucky a couple of weeks ago, which is served by a cooperative. And that was one of the federated cases I went to look at. And I was in the heart of town, and everything, all of the secondary and the neutral came below the transformers. And And that's because you can afford to run the secondary because there's another house and another house and another house. It's just when it's really spread out and not a low population density that you're gonna, what happens is they already have a pole like I showed you there. And then so all they do is install it underneath the neutral and go underground with it and they got service. That's the easiest way to do that. RUS does approve that construction where you put the transformer below the primary. And that's part of the reason they do it is to accommodate a few users over long distances, kind of.
Okay. So the secondary is the one that becomes used by multiple customers.
If
I
you
assume
string
that's-
it pole to pole, and then just keep tapping off of it. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioners, anything else? Mr. Willoughby?
You looked at me, Madam Chair, as though you did more to call on.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just kidding you. I've got a few questions in
I have some of those looks, and it was not intended. Let me put it that way. I think you know when I'm intending them.
I know. Thank you very much. Mr. Bingle, I have just a few questions on redirect. You were asked some questions about the Comporium agreement and how much you knew about the Comporium agreement. You reviewed, I believe, Mr. Bosworth's testimony, correct?
I reviewed it, yes.
And you would have looked at the exhibits attached to it as well?
Yes.
I'm going to put on the Elmo here.
I said review in lieu of a thorough reading.
So I'm going to put, this is a part of his exhibit EPB 12 attached to his rebuttal testimony. And it doesn't come off all that clear there. Let's see if I can zoom it a little bit. It goes the other way.
I can tell you, I remember one or two things from this page.
So take a look. Can you see on the screen?
Okay.
Can you read that now?
Yes.
Reduce the brightness. Yes. Is that
Other way. There you go.
go one way or the other? There we go. Maybe that's about right. Can you review that? Can you see it from? No, just keep your seat. Okay.
Yes.
So is this the exhibit that you would have reviewed about the Comporium agreement?
Yes, I remember a couple of things from that page, yes.
And you did not see the agreement between Comporium and York itself, correct?
Correct.
That's not been made available to.
Chair,
correct?
these are all leading questions. Every single one of them is. We need to stop at some point.
Well, let's ask it this way. Do you know whether or not Charter received a copy from York of the Comporium agreement?
I don't know that.
Have you seen, has anyone supplied one to you?
No.
And so where did your knowledge of the Comporium agreement come from?
There were a couple of things I have picked up along the way. One is the fact that York was actually installing the fiber for them. It didn't sound like that was costing them a lot of money. they were installing them in areas that charter's not allowed to go into. And they were also going to receive a portion of the retail receipts from those cable services. All that to me sounded like that was a little discriminatory compared to what charter has to face.
Now, you offered opinions and you were questioned about, from a number of people, about whether or not you were offering legal opinions. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
Tell the commission what your opinion about discriminatory practice is based upon.
There was one statement in my rebuttal that it's treating one, in this case, one attacher requesting to attach to poles, treating one of them significantly different than treating the other.
And so was your opinion based upon operational considerations?
Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I have to object to this line of questioning. That the third-party agreement between York and Comporium is not properly before this commission. Mr. Willoughby knows that.
It's absolutely untrue, Madam Chair. This is
Let's limit it, Mr. Willoughby.
But if I may complete the argument, this agreement is tendered by York.
I understand. I'm not sustaining the objection. Let's just
I understand, and I
limit
appreciate
where we're going here.
Do you also remember testimony from Mr. Bashra about reasons? You were asked some questions about did York offer any safety considerations for their change in policy? Do you recall those questions?
I didn't quite hear all that.
Let me restate it.
Please.
You were asked some questions about whether or not York offered any safety reasons for deviating from the NESC standards. You recall those questions?
To me, that was one of the main issues.
Did you see them offer any safety reasons, or was it reasons of convenience?
Yeah, I'm convinced the communication work zone does not need to be expanded for safety. And I'm actually concerned about the midspan clearance causing problems in roadways.
Did you see any information provided to you by York or anyone else in this docket that suggested to you that the NESC standards should not be acceptable standards in York's service area?
Again, I'm sorry, I didn't follow that. Sorry.
Did you see any evidence supplied by York, any information supplied by York Electric Cooperative, that demonstrated to you that the deviation from the National Electric Safety Standards for midspan clearance and for safety communications workers safety zone should be altered or changed from the NESC standard?
No.
Thank you very much. Those are all the redirect questions I have.
Thank you, Mr. Willoughby. No, sir. I think he caught the context of my look. Thank you, Mr. Bingham. Appreciate your testimony. Bingham, appreciate your testimony today. Let's take Thank you, sir.
And may Mr. Bingle be excused.
He may stand down. If you excuse him, it's at your peril.
Thank you.
Let's take a break until 4:45. And parties, I'm going to ask you if you can reach a resolution. If not, I will rule on that issue.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I do have a question. Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We are continuing with the hearing in docket number 2022-188-EC. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner J. Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner C. Williams, Commissioner Caston, Chair Belser, and with us virtually we have Commissioner Irvin. Mr. Willoughby.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, we have conferred and reached an agreement that we would like to tender to the commission. We will defer presenting Mr. Lupino, who would have been our next witness. Then Mr. Ellerby will call as his next witness Mr. Bashra, and will present Mr. Bashra's direct testimony and summary, and then we would ask the commission to break at the completion of the summary of his testimony. Mr. Ellerby would be permitted to consult with Mr. Bashra tonight, and we would begin our cross-examination of Mr. Bashra in the morning. Mr. Booth would be permitted to go home, and we will, in order, he will be presented virtually, and we would cross-examine him virtually. And then once Mr. Booth's testimony has been completed in cross-examination, we would present Mr. Lupino, and then Mr. Lupino would be subject to cross-examination, and that would be all of the witnesses in the case.
I thought the question was to take Mr. Booth this afternoon. How did we get to this?
Well, Madam Chair, it occurred to us as the day has gone on, the afternoon has gone on, that we won't finish Mr. Booth this afternoon. I think you asked that question. Therefore, it occurred to me that we could, instead of taking him out of order, we informed the parties that we were going to take Mr. Basha first and then Mr. Booth. Now that we realize Mr. Booth needs to be in Asheville, take care of his wife tomorrow, our alternative proposal is to have him testify virtually. So we're actually, the witnesses will go in the normal order. As I've reminded Mr. Willoughby, Mr. Lupino is a rebuttal witness only, and therefore his testimony responds to ours, which has not yet been presented. So we would, as Mr. Willoughby has said, we would call Paul Basher in the normal course. At the request of charter, we would, instead of requiring them to break their cross-examination, we would instead break for the day after his direct examination is the proposal from charter. I see you raise your eyebrows. But we would be able, if we did that before cross had started, part of our agreement is that we'd be able to use Mr. Basha as a resource between now and when the hearing resumes tomorrow.
Okay. We'll proceed. Thank y'all for getting that worked out.
And so you'll proceed along those lines, Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So I just want to be clear about something. Mr. Ellerby, you indicated that y'all would be able to use Mr. Basha as a resource tonight. Is there any party objecting to Mr. Ellerby being able to talk to his witness between direct and cross as a resource?
Not from
anybody object to that? He's under oath. You're not on.
It is interesting, but with the understanding that there will be no cross begun on that witness, on that basis, AT&T would not object to the agreements that's been reached.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Wright?
I agree with Mr. Turner's comments there.
Thank you.
No objection.
ORS?
We don't object, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Ellerby, please proceed. And I think that's Mr. Booth leaving. Safe travels, sir. We'll see you virtually tomorrow.
Can we make sure somebody sends him the link? Now that I'm thinking about it.
That'll be helpful. Will you confer and make sure they have his contact information? Correct? Thank you. Which microphone do y'all want him? This one on the left? Well, yeah. Your right, my left.
Mr. Basha, if I could get you to raise your right hand, if you could sit down, so they can get you on camera there. That's all right. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do.
The red light on.
I do.
Shall I proceed, Madam Chair?
Yes, please, Mr. Elby. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Basha. Would you state your name for the record, please?
Ernest Paul Basha, Jr.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
York Electric Cooperative. I'm president and CEO.
And have you caused to be prepared 15 pages of direct testimony that has been pre-filed in this docket?
I am, sir.
If I were to ask you the questions contained in that direct testimony today, would your answers be the same?
They would be, sir.
Okay. Madam Chair, we'd ask that Mr. Basha's direct testimony be copied in the record as if given from the stand.
Mr. Bash's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if read from the stand.
And Mr. Basha, were there 8 exhibits numbered EPB 1 through EPB 8 attached to your direct testimony?
There was, sir.
Okay. Madam Chair, we'd ask that Mr. Basha's 8 exhibits be marked as the next hearing exhibit and entered into evidence.
Mr. Bash's pre-filed direct exhibits numbering 8 will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit 3 and entered into the record of this case.
Mr. Basha, I'm going to go through some questions that will take you through your direct testimony. Actually, why don't we get since I've been known to forget this, why don't we go ahead and get your sole rebuttal testimony in? Did you cause to be prepared 10 pages of sole rebuttal testimony that's been pre-filed in this document?
That's correct, sir.
If I were to ask you the questions contained in the sole rebuttal testimony today, would your answers be the same?
They would, sir.
And were there 7 exhibits EPB 9 through EPB 16 attached to the sole rebuttal testimony?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. Madam Chair, we'd ask that Mr. Bash's sole rebuttal testimony be copied in the record, into the record as if given from the stand.
Mr. Bash's pre-filed sole rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
And we would ask that Mr. Bash's exhibits EPB 9 through EPB 16 be entered into the record as the next hearing exhibit.
Mr. Bash's pre-filed sole rebuttal exhibits EPB 9 through EPB 16 will be marked for identification as a composite exhibit and marked as hearing exhibit 4 and received into the evidence of this case.
Mr. Basha, let's go through your direct testimony first, please. Would you give the commission your background working for York Electric Cooperative, please? Just a summary of your involvement with the co-op.
Yes, sir. I came to York Electric in 1989, right about the time Hurricane Hugo came through, and was a planning engineer, and then later became head of the engineering department, and in 2003 became president and CEO.
And do you currently hold a position with Central Electric Power Cooperative?
I do, yes, sir. Chairman of the board.
Okay. And what is, just for people, what is Central Electric Power Cooperative?
Central is a power aggregator for all the co-ops in the state that get power together and then resell it to the member co-ops.
Now, Mr. Basher, I'm going to ask you to summarize your direct testimony on the, both the pole clearance issue that's in issue and the ground clearance issue, right? So first of all, give us the background of the pole clearance issue, the decision that York made to adopt the 84-inch clearance that's the subject of this case.
Yeah, yes, sir. As the manager of engineering back in those days, we had a lot of cable growth, a lot of new customers. If you recall back how South Carolina was growing back at that time frame, it was pretty explosive growth. And so we were trying to keep up with all the growth. And at the same time, we were trying to deal with safety issues because of farm equipment and trucks and that kind of stuff that sometimes got tangled into the phone wires, cable TV wires. And we're also trying to deal with cable and phone companies that weren't always as responsive as they need to be to come and lower their equipment for a transformer to be installed. And those kind of things kept piling up. And then we had issues where if they did have something was not the right height and a truck hit it or a piece of farm equipment hit it and it tore down poles and wires, they were really not real reticent to pay the bills. And us being electric cooperative, the members are the ones that have to bear that cost if a phone company or cable TV company didn't pay those bills. And those numbers were starting to stack up. So we had several issues in play. One was safety, one was growth, and one was just the workmanship issues were not there, and the attachments weren't being put up according to code. And so we were trying to address all those things at one time.
Now, you mentioned the addition of transformers to poles. I'm going to show you a document, your exhibit EPB 8. I think I see you having that in front of you.
Okay. Yes, I got it.
How do I zoom in? All right. Tell us what this shows, Mr. Basher.
Okay, this shows a single phase line. You have the phase wire, which is at 7,300 volts. You have the neutral wire, which is grounded but does carry a current in situations. And then you have the communication cable below that. In between the neutral and the communication cable, you have a transformer that has been hung. And you can see, and that was a very good question about the conduit. And so there's your conduit coming down the pole. And the conductors going into the conduit are energized. They're 240 volts. The top of that transformer is at 7,300 volts. So that transformer basically takes 7,300 volts, converts it to 240 volts. What we have here is a situation where a new house is being connected, and we had to go out and install a transformer, wire, and conduit to serve that new house. And thus, a violation occurred where the communication cable is attached there. So this is a situation where we would have asked ahead of time for the communication company to lower their attachment. But if they didn't do it in a timely manner, we would go out here and then eventually lower their attachment for them and send them a bill for it. Because if you look at this drawing, it's hard to see up here, but if you leave it just like this, if we didn't move it, the communication worker would be within 20 inches of 7,300 volts, which is not safe. So a lot of times we would move it for them to protect the communication worker.
But Mr. Basher, let me slow you down a little bit. Is this illustrating a communication line attached at the level 40 inches below the neutral?
It was connected there before the transformer.
Before the transformer. So the transformer is what we're showing. What you're showing here, is it the case that you're showing what happens when a transformer is added in a configuration where the communication line is 40 inches below the neutral?
That's correct, sir.
And was this prior to the changes in your clearance requirements that you made in the agreements in the early 2000s, what did York require in a clearance from between the neutral and the communication line?
Prior to the changes?
Yes, sir.
40 inches.
Okay. So with this diagram showing that 40-inch clearance, does that show what the typical configuration would be prior to the changes that were made in the early 2000s?
That's correct.
Okay. And tell me what needs to happen if you have a new customer that wants service and they're located in a lot or a home, they're building that's going to be served by that pole. Is that what gives rise to the need to add a transformer?
That's correct.
Okay. And back at that time, what would happen when York needed to add that transformer to serve a new member?
In this case of this picture here,
yes,
we would hang the transformer, connect the member, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, would you contact the communication service provider?
Yes, we would contact them as soon as we had a request for service from the new member.
And what would the content of that communication be?
A lot of times it would be a phone call to the local person saying, we have a connect here, can you work with us?
I'm trying not to ask leading questions, Mr. Bashir.
I'm sorry, sir.
Mr. Willoughby's getting nervous and jumpy over there behind you, and he's trying to pay me back because I objected to him earlier. So
I'm just smiling.
So if you call the communication service provider, what did you say to them? What were you asking them?
We were asking them to come out there, usually within a couple of days, and lower their attachment to make room so we could safely put everything in and connect the customer.
Did the pole attachment agreement in place at that time, and this again is prior to the changes, did the pole attachment agreement require them to move their line down so that you could put that transformer in place?
I believe so.
Okay. And what was your experience with the communication service providers in this type situation back in the, I guess, late 1990s, early 2000s? What was your experience?
Not responsive at all. When we call, very rarely, if ever, they would come out in a timely manner.
What alternatives were available to York in that circumstance?
Really, what we would have to do is lower their equipment down to a safe distance and reattach it for them.
Could you just go ahead and put the transformer in without lowering the line?
Yes, sir, you could, but it would create an unsafe situation for their workers.
Okay, and I think you were getting to that point, but just if you would please explain why it creates an unsafe situation.
Yes, sir, and I didn't mean to get ahead of you there. I do apologize. It creates an unsafe situation because, first of all, if you notice on that drawing, the communication cable would now be right at the 240 volt conductor, and the 7300 volt conductor would only be 20 inches away from that communication worker would be working.
So did York ever go ahead and put the transformer in place under those circumstances and leave that unsafe situation?
Best of my knowledge, we did not leave any unsafe situations, sir.
What other alternatives would York pursue if that was the case?
Well, we're committed to the safety of the worker and the public, so we would not leave it. We would try to get somebody out there to work with us, but we weren't going to leave it in a situation to cause harm to somebody.
Were there occasions where York would move the communication line down?
Definitely, sir.
Okay. Did the contract between your pole attachment agreement in place at that time, did it permit York to move the line of the communication service provider down the pole, assuming there was space to do that, and then bill the communication service provider the cost of doing that work?
It did, sir.
Okay. And did York avail itself of those contractual provisions back at that time?
We did, sir.
And what did you do? How did you do that?
We would send them an invoice when we had several of these and await payment.
And how did that work for you?
Very rarely do we ever get paid for them, and the membership in bearing the cost of this work.
And This is 20 years ago, is that right, sir?
That's correct.
And in your direct testimony, you didn't specify what companies that were involved that you're describing as being unresponsive,
I did
correct?
not, sir, no.
Okay. Tell the commission what your recollection is in terms of the way the communication service providers.
Madam Chairwoman, we object. This is intended to be a summary of Mr. Bash's pre-filed testimony, and instead what it is an extended explication of what he's filed and an amplification, and he's including information that is nowhere to be found within his pre-filed testimony.
We didn't intend to go beyond the testimony. We're simply trying to go through the testimony through questions rather than through a summary that was read by the witness.
The question that Mr. Elvey just asked is specifically to provide information that is not within his pre-filed testimony.
There seems to be some, I'm just trying to go through too, Mr. Ellaby. Let's stay within the confines of the pre-file, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll do that. Did you make a change in your clearance requirements based on the experience you've been describing?
We did. That's when we did the new contracts.
And tell the commission, summarize your testimony for Mr. Warner on the changes that you made with respect to the clearances that we're talking about here.
We made changes in the clearance to the 84 inches to allow for any future stuff that York Electric would need to put out there. We would not have to go back to the cable or phone companies to ask them to lower. So there was plenty of room for us to put whatever we needed out there at a time. Also, when we made those changes, we added the 18-foot clearance, and that was largely for safety because we're
going to get to the 18 foot. We're trying
I
to
thought
do
you
that
would cover
separately.
both. My apologies, sir.
No, sir. No, sir. The change that you made with respect to the clearance between the neutral and the communication service line, was that change made for all of your pole attachment agreements for all entities that attach to your poles?
That's correct. All companies.
Did this change address the concerns that you described on EPB Exhibit 8?
It did, sir. How did it
address that?
It allowed for the transformer to be installed, the conduits to be installed without creating a safety violation or an unsafe work environment for communication workers.
What effect, would you summarize the part of your direct testimony that described the effect on members of York Electric Cooperative with respect to those communication service providers that didn't respond to your invoices for the cost of moving facilities?
I'm just going to object again, Madam Chairwoman. This is way outside of his pre-filed testimony.
That's in his.
I think I read that somewhere.
That's in there.
Go ahead, Mr. Elvey.
Thank you, ma'am. Well, simply the rest of the co-op membership had to bear those costs, being that we're a co-op and not a stock-owned company.
So if you would turn to page 8 of your direct testimony.
Page 8, yes, sir.
Why don't we just read into the record this question and answer? I'll ask the question, and then if you'd read that. What was York's response to this pattern of behavior?
I'm sorry. Picked up the wrong one. I do apologize. I can get it right here if you like. Sir, I probably need to borrow it back from you because somehow those numbers don't match up, so I apologize. Okay. We found it very frustrating. The refusal of these companies to reimburse us for our costs to move their lines meant that our members were covering these costs. We thought that was unacceptable since the effect was that the members of our nonprofit cooperative were subsidizing the operation of a large for-profit communication companies that were benefiting from using our poles to deliver their service to their customers.
Thank you, Mr. Basher. What was the result of that change, Mr. Basher?
Could you clarify a little bit?
The change to the 84-inch clearance. What was the result of that change with respect to the issues that we're talking about?
We no longer had to send a whole lot of invoices to the attaching companies because there was no work to be done once they were attached.
Now, let's talk about the ground clearance issue. Can you describe that issue for the commission, please?
Yes, sir. As been noted, safety code is 15.5 feet, and we were having issues where delivery trucks, farm equipment were occasionally tangling into the phone and cable attachments. And so while we're making these changes, we pursued change it to 18 feet for the safety of the public, but also for farmers and that sort of thing.
Did those instances create safety risks, Mr. Basher?
In our view, it did, yes, sir.
Did they create reliability risks?
Definitely, because usually when a truck or farm equipment catches a cable or phone line, the pole usually breaks right at that attachment point, which brings the energized conductors down on the truck or the farm equipment.
What was York's communications companies, what was York's experience with communication companies' compliance with the requirements to engineer their attachments to your poles in a way that ensured that the mid-span clearances would be met?
It was spotty at best. There was a lot of times they were not meeting even the 15.5 feet, and then later even less than 18 feet.
What change did you decide to make, Mr. Basher?
Madam Chairwoman, we're just going to object again. This is not a summary of his testimony. He's just recapitulating his testimony, amplifying his testimony. In fact, reading portions of his testimony, which are already into the record again. All of this is very highly irregular and improper, and we object to it.
It's done here on occasion here at the SCPSC. I'm not sure where you're stating irregular, but it's done. So,
Madam Chair, I might observe, frankly, it would have taken less time for him to have just read the direct than
thank you,
go
Mr.
through this
Willoughby.
process.
We think, well, thank you, Madam Chair. It's it has been done by lots of us in the last few years. Mr. Warner is not out of the ordinary. Please explain the change that York made to address your issues that you had with communication cable not meeting the required mid-span clearances.
We changed from 15.5 feet to 18 feet when we did the new contract.
And what was the result of that change?
A whole lot less incidents where equipment or trucks got into the cable, and I'm trying to remember, it's been a lot of years. I don't know if we have maybe one since that's happened. It cut it down a whole lot.
Did that requirement, the 18-foot clearance at the mid-span ground clearance, did that apply to all of your pole attachment agreements by all entities that attach to your poles?
That's correct, sir.
What is York's view And we'll cover this in more detail, but I want to summarize your direct testimony. What has York done over the last 10 to 15 years regarding trying to encourage broadband in rural parts of your service territory?
We have
prior to 2019 and
Correct.
your board decision that we'll talk about in a few minutes.
We tried to encourage all companies to put internet capabilities in our service areas in the rural areas.
And what was the result of that effort?
Largely, it was we'd like to, but it's not cost effective.
Did anyone during those conversations tell you that the reason they would not extend broadband in the rural parts of your service territory because of your clearance requirements?
No, sir, not to my knowledge.
Now let's turn to your rebuttal testimony, Mr. Basher, please. And what I'm going to do here with respect to the rebuttal is to go through and identify and perhaps ask you a question about your exhibits. So Exhibit 9 has been talked about in this docket. It's a notice of entry of contract. Do you see that, Mr. Basher?
I do, sir.
And what was the purpose of that filing?
I believe we were required to give notice of our contract and via this form.
And this is the contract between York and Comporium that's been the subject of some back and forth in this proceeding so far?
That's correct, sir.
Was this notice filed with the Public Service Commission?
It was, sir, best of my knowledge.
February 9, 2021?
Yes, sir.
Take a look at Exhibit 10, EPB 10, the next document. Can you identify that, please?
I believe it's a letter written to our VP of Engineering regarding negotiations about a new pole attachment agreement.
Did this letter also request information about the, well, let me read this. Did the letter also say that Spectrum is concerned that York may be affording other attaches, including its affiliate Comporium, more favorable standards for broadband equipment?
I haven't read this letter in a while, but I do not believe it's mentioned, sir.
Take a look at the third paragraph on the first page.
The one that begins with moreover?
The last sentence in that paragraph.
Okay. However, Spectrum is concerned that York may be affording other attachers, including the affiliate Comporium, more favorable standards of broadband deployment and seeks to ensure a new agreement provides non-discriminatory terms.
The next exhibit is, would you identify the next exhibit specifically, please? 11, EPB 11.
This is a letter from our general counsel's firm regarding their request, I believe.
Responding to Mr. Warner's letter?
That's correct.
Exhibit EPB 12. Is an email exchange, Mr. Basha?
It is.
Would you explain that, please?
I believe this is an email exchange regarding back and forth between Mr. Chris McDonald of Tinkin Law Firm and the Shepherd Mullins Law Firm regarding the attachment desire, and I think there's a reference to Comporium in that too, I believe.
And the last page of that document provide a summary of the agreement between York and Comporium?
Yes, this is below is a summary of the material terms of Comporium agreement, and it's got several bullet points, sir.
And I think Mr. Willoughby actually has already used that page in his redirect examination of Mr. Bingle earlier this afternoon. Do you recall that?
I do recall, sir.
Okay. It would be correct that York's lawyers explained the circumstances of the contract between York and Comporium?
I believe so, sir.
The next exhibit is EPB 13, Mr. Basher.
That's correct.
And what is that document?
This is the agreement back in 2002 between York Electric and Rock Hill Telephone, who was the predecessor of Comporium, that we went under back in those days. And I think this outlines the some of the matters we've already discussed.
Okay. And are the clearance requirements in this agreement 84 inches between the grounded neutral and the communication line?
Yes, sir. I don't recall which section, but upon reviewing this document, I did see it in there.
And it also had the 18-foot ground clearance?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. The next document, EPB 14. Would you identify that, please?
This is a pole attachment agreement dated January of 2004 between York Electric Cooperative and Time Warner Incorporated.
And are the terms of that agreement the same as or identical to the agreement with Rock Hill Telephone Company that's now Comporium?
Best of my knowledge, yes, sir.
You, in your rebuttal testimony, you respond to the photographs that were attached to Mr. Lupino's testimony. Would you tell the commission what is shown in the photographs that were attached to Mr. Lupino's rebuttal testimony?
Just to clarify, these are the ones where the attachments on our poles that, where we've attached fiber?
Yes,
Is
sir.
that correct? Yes, sir. The pictures show fiber attached to York Electric poles. The fiber is owned by York Electric Cooperative, and it's attached in what's called the electric space.
Are those facilities owned by Comporium?
No, sir, they're owned by York Electric Cooperative.
What were the qualifications of the employees or contractors who install those facilities?
They're certified to operate in the electric space.
And what is the electric space, Mr. Basher?
It is the space within the approach distance of the energized conductor. So whereas the communication worker needs to stay 40 inches below the neutral per the NESC, we can, our folks can go, these contractors are allowed to go within a foot of the energized conductor.
Are those facilities that are shown in the photographs that you have described as being installed by York and York's contractors, were those installed, are those Comporium lines, Mr. Basher?
No, they're owned by York Electric Cooperative.
And are those facilities installed pursuant to the agreement between York and Comporium?
They are, sir.
What is the plan, Mr. Basher, with respect to the York's decision to go forward with its rural broadband project through this agreement with Comporium?
The plan is to get internet service to about 5,000 folks in rural parts of our service territory that do not have internet capabilities at this time.
Are those facilities being built, or is York building the fiber into areas that are served by Charter or other communication service providers with internet service?
When we started the project, there was no other provider in those areas.
Are there any charter facilities on the poles shown in the photographs?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
Last exhibit, Mr. Basha, or last two exhibits I want to go back to. So do you see EPB 15?
I do.
What is that document, sir?
This regarding an invoice where there was damage done by a contractor working for Charter Spectrum, in which multiple poles were broken, power was out to several, a good group of members, and we had asked them to reimburse us for those damages because they were not attached high enough ground clearance.
What was the date of the incident? Second paragraph.
Yeah, 12/10 of 19.
And what is the date, if you look on the second page of that document, what is the date of that invoice?
March 25, 2020.
And the first page, what is the date of that letter?
August 10th, 2020.
And what is the amount of money that York is asking Charter to reimburse it?
Yes, sir, $9,144.13.
And would you identify EPB 16, Mr. Basha?
This is where we're asking for them to work with us on payment. I believe, if I recall, let me see the date here. I think this was after Spectrum asked to attach the poles, and then we had this outstanding invoice that had not been paid.
If you would read Mr. Spencer's email, it's right in the middle of that page.
Starting with good morning.
Sure.
There we go. Good morning, Justin. Thank you for reaching out to us concerning possible new attachments on the YEC system. Unfortunately, there is an unresolved invoice between our two companies that must be settled before YEC will allow Spectrum to make any further attachments on our system. Please let us know if you have any questions. A copy of the letter and invoice is attached. Once this matter is resolved, YEC will be glad to work with Spectrum to safely and properly attach its facilities to YEC poles.
And what was the date of that email, sir?
June 1, 2021.
And are you aware of whether that invoice was eventually paid by Charter?
Yeah, once this email was sent, the invoice was paid.
Okay. Is that refusal to pay reminiscent of the conduct you described in the early 2000s?
It is, sir.
Thank you. No further questions from me. Please answer any questions that, well, I'm sorry, we're not going to do cross-examination today, so. Thank you, Mr. Basher.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Williams?
I just want to make sure I'm tracking just so I can keep up. Was that the summary?
That was a summary.
All right. Just want to make sure.
We finished with the summary.
Okay, based on the agreement between Spectrum and York Electric and agreed to by the other parties, we will begin first thing in the morning with cross-examination of Mr. Basha. And we will adjourn this afternoon. We will return tomorrow morning at 9:30, please.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Thomas?
I have, I guess, an administrative question that just occurred to me. Many, many years ago, I was a customer of York Electric Co-op, and I understand it is member-owned. I don't know if I'm still a member or not. It was like 30, 40 years ago? Am I still a member of the co-op?
I believe yes, sir. I believe that once your capital credits are paid out, I believe you're no longer a member, and we're paying, and if it's been 30 years and we've already paid you back your capital credits.
Okay, I just want to make sure I didn't have a conflict of interest. So everybody's okay with that then?
I have no objection.
Well, Madam Chair, I've kind of lived all over the state multiple times. I've probably been in 3 or 4 electric cooperatives. I don't remember. So, if y'all owe me anything, send it to me. But other than that, I'm not I don't know either. But y'all look it up. If you got a problem, let me know real soon, or let the chair know real soon.
I'm sure we'll hear about it in the morning if there's an issue. And that's the right way to do it. So, is there anything else? I'm hesitant to ask. Hearing none, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you at 9:30 in the morning. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Safe travels.